Speaking like a leader, how do you build trust? How do you inspire? How do you motivate your audience, your employees, your team, your customer base? How is it that some people are able to be charismatic and get a group or crowd to do what they need them to do, and others don't seem to have that skill set? That is what we're talking about today on Rethink. You guys, welcome into the podcast. Words have the power to move mountains, but they can also move minds if you understand the power of words. Leadership isn't just about action, it's more about influence. Actions is a part of it, but leadership is more about your ability to influence people. So, how can you learn to speak like a leader? How can you learn to inspire and to motivate people? That's what we're talking about today on Rethink Podcast. Great leaders are not just born. Here's a quote: they are shaped by the ability to communicate with clarity, with purpose, and also with passion. Your voice is your most powerful tool for creating impact. This episode, what we're going to do is unpack the psychology of effective communication. How can you become a more effective communicator? How can you inspire? How can you teach? How can you motivate? Today, we're going to unpack all that. Effective communication. We're going to teach you actionable strategies, things that you can do on a daily basis to form good habits, where you can build up trust and inspire people and motivate people as well. We're going to provide practical exercises to elevate your speaking skills. I noticed you guys really resonated with our recent post, our recent podcast, which was entitled, How Can I Improve My Presentation and Public Speaking Skills? So this is taking it a step further. Speak like a leader. How can I inspire and motivate my audience? Quote number 2 is, when you speak with clarity and passion, you don't just lead a conversation, you can ignite a movement. Excuse me. So guys, welcome in again. Please, if you haven't done so already, please make sure you subscribe to the podcast, wherever you're listening to us at. On the podcast side, guys, thank you so much. I need you guys' help. Go over on the YouTube side and like and subscribe there. We're really trying hard to build up our YouTube audience. So I know we've got so many people on the platform side in terms of the podcast, and I'm very grateful for that. But we're trying to build up our YouTube audience as well. So if you don't mind, it'll help us out if you go over on the YouTube side and just, listen to a couple videos, listen to a couple podcasts there, and like them and subscribe on that side. That'll help the algorithm start to kick in to help us, grow organically, just like we did on the podcast side. So if you don't mind doing that, I really appreciate it. If this is your first time, subscribe to us wherever you're listening to us at, so you don't forget who we are and where we are. This is our 4th season, so you got a little catching up to do. Please go back. It's a holiday season, so you may have some downtime. This is a perfect time to binge some podcasts. And what better binge podcasts to do than to rethink podcasts? Let's jump into the daily practices. Daily practices and the benefits thereof. The first thing is active listening. And if you have been a part of this podcast at all for any length of time, this is not the first time you've heard this term, active listening. Active listening, what this means is, why don't you dedicate some time, 10 minutes, let's call it, in each conversation to simply, fully listen and engage without interpreting and out interrupting. Acknowledge what's said by summarizing and affirming some key points. The benefit of this is it builds trust and it ensures that your responses resonate with the other person. There's nothing more irritating than if you're speaking to someone and they do one of two things. Either they're not listening, which is indication by them responding, out of sequence or completely out of pocket as it relates to the subject matter. But the other thing is that they interrupt you and they offer a solution or some sort of statement before you even finish explaining. So active listening is a very key part of becoming a great leader. If you don't know what your audience wants, if you don't know what questions your audience is asking, how are you going to be able to speak to that? And the only way you can know what your audience desires are is to actually listen. Number 2, tone and pacing practice. These are some things, if you're not used to public speaking, if you're not used to speaking, in a group, these are things that you have to learn. So here's an activity. Spend 5 minutes a day just practicing speaking slowly and deliberately. emphasizing certain words, keywords, let's call them. Record yourself and adjust based on, how you're speaking in the playback. What's the benefit of this? Well, it enhances clarity and it commands attention. Now, I've been public speaking for years, and not to say that I'm some expert, but I certainly am a lot better than when I was in my 20s. When I first started doing this. When I was in high school, as opposed to or in contrast to what my kids have to do in high school now, we didn't have a lot of public speaking opportunities. It wasn't something that was taught to us at a high school level. As a matter of fact, I don't think I ever spoke in public in high school. College, on the other hand, was a very different experience because every class I had, for the most part, had some sort of public speaking element to it because they taught it, they took it very seriously, and they knew as a professional I was going to need to have the skill set. So I would be nervous, I would have to, really prepare. At that point I was a very introverted type of person. I still am, but for the most part, I was very introverted, very quiet person. And so it took me getting out of my shell to become comfortable with public speaking. But because it was a requirement for most of my classes, I didn't have any other choice. So I said all that to say, if you are someone who is an introvert or has not had a lot of practice as it relates to public speaking, tone and pacing is something you're going to have to practice. When I first started doing the podcast, it was something that I had to learn. I had to be able to understand if I'm talking too fast, if I'm talking too slow, how to emphasize, how to storytell. These are things that come through repetition. So that's why I'm saying, like yoga, this is a practice. The more you do it, the better you'll get. You can record yourself, or the more public speaking engagement that you have, you can judge by your audience, or you can do surveys. But tone and pacing are things that you're going to have to practice. If you take a few minutes each day and practice this, you'll get better at it. Again, the benefit is that it enhances clarity and it commands attention, particularly if you couple that with being a good storyteller. And I think to some degree, in my experience, most public speakers that I like are also very good storytellers. All right, number 3, speaking of storytellers, storytelling integration. Write and practice telling one short story daily, which can align with the message that you want to deliver to your audience. Let me give you an example. About 2 or 3 years ago, my daughter got married, and I decided one of the ways for me to introduce the toast was just to tell a story. And I told the story that, how I became knowledgeable of her boyfriend at the time, now husband. And what it did, it helped the audience to settle and also begin to understand my point of view in terms of being the father and how I came to know the fiance or the husband. But being a good storyteller is about captivating or getting your audience attention. And I don't know, but it's something about someone that can tell a story that is captivating, that is somewhat mesmerizing. You tend to be, you're able to convey and communicate to folks in a special way that if you're not a good storyteller, you lack that sort of charisma. I think if you have charisma, you tend to be able to be a good storyteller. And the benefit of this is that it can engage your audience emotionally. So 9 times out of 10, if you look at, on the religious side, people who are ministers and things like that, they tend to be people who are charismatic, good orators, and people who can tell good stories because they captivate their audience and they can make whatever the content and the context is relatable to that audience. And that's what you need to do depending on what your goal is. If you're someone that's selling a product and you're trying to, promote this to an audience, to stakeholders, then you need to be able to tell the story of this product and how it relates to that audience. Hopefully each week as you hear me here on the podcast, I am relating to you and hopefully convincingly enough that you come back week after week after week, that this podcast is of value to you and we can provide a valuable service here as it relates to updating and upgrading your skill sets around, self-development and personal development. So again, storytelling engages your audience emotionally and it helps them to remember your message. It really does. And here's the other thing it does. If you are someone who is nervous as it relates to speaking in public, telling a story can not only engage your audience emotionally and it helps them to remember you, but it can help to calm you down because you know the story, right? It's usually something that you've experienced. So you don't have to refer to notes. You can have really good eye contact with your audience and you can catch your breath or catch your pace, if you will, as a speaker. Sometimes if this is really important to you, or there are a lot of people or whatever it is that's making you more nervous than not, telling a story at the beginning of your speech can help you to calm your nerves. And it's a great way for you to introduce yourself to people and look at people eye to eye. Okay, so again, that's storytelling. And the last thing is intentional eye contact. Speaking of eye contact, here we go. Practice maintaining natural eye contact. Maintaining eye contacts build connections with your audience. This is relatively intuitive. The more that you can look someone in the eye, the more believable you are, the more convincing you are, and you're building that trust. I remember when I played sports my whole life, and you would hear in the locker room, speeches from coaches and things like that, and coaches would always look you in the eye. I mean, whether you had the helmet on or not, it was always eye contact as relates to building that relationship with the players. They wanted you to understand how serious this situation was. You're going into, let's call it war, but we know it's a game. But they were building this type of mentality that it's us against them. And so it was a highly energized and yet motivating type of speech. But eye contact was always one of those things that helped you to build that connection and convey the sincerity, in this case, the seriousness of what the coach was trying to get across. Now, again, if you're trying to sell a product or service to your clients, but you are or potential clients, but you fail to have eye contact, think of it like this. If you're the client, if you have a lawyer that can't look you in the eye, or you are a potential purchaser of a service or a product, and the vendor cannot look you in the eye, it gives this awkward feeling of lack of confidence, and maybe there's maybe say there's some underlying things going on that you're not completely sure of. But eye contact and a firm handshake are always very good signs for a business deal. All right. So those are the 5 things that you can do on a regular basis to benefit you as it relates to speaking like a leader, motivating your audience, motivating and inspire your audience. Now, there's a 7-day challenge. Okay. I always like to put these together to see who's going to actually do it. But there's a 7-day challenge. I'm going to walk you through it real quick. Coupled with the daily habits, this 7-day challenge can help you to see some change in about 7 days. So again, if you're an introvert, if you're not someone that speaks in front of the public on a regular basis, you're trying to gear up for a new meeting or a new role that you may have in your career. Maybe you're new to teaching, and being at a high school was one thing, but now I'm teaching at colleges, and there are these 200 and 300 student type of auditorium rooms I've got to teach in, and I really want to strike a good chord with my constituents, my students, and I need to really be persuasive. I need to be inspiring. I need to be motivating. Okay. So let's talk about what we can do in 7 days to kind of help us to get in that spirit of speaking like a leader. First thing you can do on day 1 is to define your leadership voice. What does that sound like? Define your leadership voice. The task here is to write 3 words to define your leadership style. Is it compassion? Is it driven? Is it strategic? What is your leadership style? Use these as a filter for your communication. Okay, use this as a filter for your communication. Here's a question to ask yourself. How do these traits influence how I want others to perceive me? How do these traits influence the way that I want others to perceive me? So if you are a entrepreneur and you own a company and you've got, let's call it 50 employees. Okay. That is what you are during the day. You're a dad or mom, but during the day, you're a company owner and you've got these employees. On the weekends, you're a soccer mom coach or a soccer dad coach, and your audience is completely different. So you're still trying to motivate folks, but they're a different audience. So think about the question in that regard. How do the traits influence, what you want to and how you want to be perceived? You don't necessarily want to take the same sort of aggression with soccer kids as you do with your employees or with the high school football team of boys. So use this exercise to determine what your leadership voice is going to sound like. You can lead quietly and you can also lead aggressively. It just depends on what your goal is. Day 2, you want to master active listening. We've kind of talked about that already a little bit, but let's go into it a little bit more. In one meeting or conversation, listen without interrupting and summarize the speaker's main points before responding. Again, in one meeting or conversation, listen without interrupting. That means don't say anything. You're dictating, you're listening, but you're not saying anything. And then at the end, summarize all of the listener's main points before you respond. That is an excellent way to let your stakeholder, your audience know that you as a leader, you're actually listening. One of the things that I like to do is, especially if you're on, so many people are on these Zoom calls these days, especially if you're on, conference calls and things like that, is to summarize the question. I do 2 things. When I'm speaking, if I am giving instruction or an opinion or whatever it is, if I'm speaking, I will lay out the details of my thought and then I will summarize it. So if any of that was confusing, there's a summary statement that kind of brings it all together. So that's number 1. Number 2, if someone is asking me something or someone is telling me something, I listen and certainly do try not to interrupt, but I listen. And before I respond, I summarize what I thought I heard you ask or say. So there's nothing wrong with restating the question. If nothing else, it lets everybody else on the call understand the direction we're going in. Here's the question. If you didn't hear it, here's what she's asking. Here's what he's asking. And that also shows your organizational skills. So as a leader, it's important for you to be perceived as inclusive. And so for me, I want to make sure that everybody is on the same page. Someone may not have heard the question. So before I go off answering, let me make sure that everybody on my team understands and we're on the same page. All right, so that's day number 2, mastering that active listening. Number 3, record and refine your speaking. Record and refine your speaking. Record yourself delivering a 2 to 3 minute explanation of your role or your vision. Listen back, listen to what you recorded intently. Identify one area where you can improve. It can be your tone, it can be your pacing, it can be clarity. And the question you want to ask yourself is, what stood out about the way I communicated? Was it effective? Was it clear? Was it, easily understood? When I'm doing a podcast, I listen to every podcast that I do. And I've got to the point now where I actually like it. At the beginning, hearing your voice, particularly now when I'm seeing myself on YouTube and things like that, it's not the most comfortable thing because we're all self-critics. But at the end of the day, it's necessary because when my audience listens to it, I want to ensure that they're getting the best quality they can. Okay, I'm not suggesting to you that I'm going to be Martin Luther King in terms of oration, but I am the best version of Kelly that I can be on these podcasts. And I want to make sure that you're understanding from a verbal standpoint what I'm saying. I'm articulating correctly. I don't have volume up too high. I don't have it too low. I don't have something in the background going. I don't have some sort of, aggravating sound on the microphone, et cetera, et cetera. This has to be, if I want this to be effective, it has to be clearly communicated. All right, so let's now get to number 4. And number 4 is what we were talking about before as it relates to storytelling. Add a story to your message. I love doing this because it settles me down and it also makes people feel more related to me. It's a personal thing. Normally, when I'm speaking to crowds, I always like to tell a story. I think the other reason is because I'm from the country, and this is just kind of how we do. We talk, we tell stories. There's always some sort of reflection on our upbringing or something happened to us that is related to whatever we're dealing with at the time. And telling that story helps people to kind of relate to you, because 9 times out of 10, or even, 5 or 8 times out of 10, something similar may have happened to them. So it keeps their attention. So add a story to your message. Create and practice sharing a short story. Now, listen, don't become some microphone terrorist where you are completely just telling the story. You're forgetting about your message and your reason for talking to your audience. It needs to be in alignment with your vision in terms of your speech, and it needs to be to the point, and as long as it needs to be. So add a story, create and practice sharing a short story related to your key value or your lesson. And the question you want to ask yourself in this case is, how did the story make my message more memorable? Okay. How did this story make my message more memorable? So if I went back to my toast, my daughter's wedding, I began with the story about my daughter losing her keys. She lived out of town at the time, and I was traveling at the time. I wasn't even at home myself. So, understanding the story, I'll fast forward, but my son-in-law, my now son-in-law, offered to remedy this situation for me. And it kind of proved to me the value, the type of person that he was, in order to want to go out of his way to help someone. So my telling this story about the lost key and my daughter being locked out of her car and my son-in-law flying, hundreds of miles to go and take her the key was something that got people's attention. It was something that no one knew besides me and my daughter and my son-in-law and my wife and family. And so it's a way for me to introduce some of the characteristics and things that I liked about him with a story. So it drove home my message. So if you're going to introduce a story, make sure it's on topic, make sure it's something that's not really long, make sure it is in alignment with your core message. Number 5, empowering words. Make sure you're using empowering words. Make a list of 5 motivational terms, phrases, words, etc. Use at least one of them within an interaction of people today. Make sure you have a litany of positive phrases. I can't tell you how much better it feels to talk to someone or listen to someone who has a solution-oriented mentality, someone who has positive outlook on life, someone who knows how to, in a very descriptive way, communicate to you a positive outcome no matter what the situation is. It makes you feel better. It really does. No matter what the situation is, to have someone who can articulate in a very positive manner a solution for your problem. This is why people buy other people's product. If you ever listen to Tony Robinson, for example, now I'm suggesting that you go out and try to be Tony Robinson, because it's going to be a very hard task. But if you ever listen to him talk, there's not a problem that he can't solve. There isn't. There isn't. And he convinces you of that to the point where you want to buy whatever he's selling, because he's very convincing as it relates to positive phrasing, motivational words, inspiring speech. And if that's the direction you want to go in, then maybe benchmark somebody like Tony Robbins. Don't try to become him. I'm saying benchmark. I want you to see his style, his pacing, his reverberation, the types of words that he's using, the fact that he does not concentrate on a problem. He is solution oriented. No one, listen, when people come to you, if you're a therapist, for example, and you're wanting to motivate your clients, people understand what their problems are. They're the first ones to understand that they have a problem. They don't need you to restate it 100 times. What they are coming to you for is a solution. Okay. So be a solution oriented person, be motivational in that way. When you can provide a solution to people's pain points, to their problems, that's when you can get their attention. If you couple that with the empowering words, which is number 5, what you're able to do is really connect with people. Question you want to ask yourself is, how did positive language impact the tone of my conversation? And I'll tell you the answer to it. People always feel better when they think there's a solution afoot. And they feel worse when they feel like there's not. If you can convince people that there's a solution, people will automatically feel better because they feel like, okay, I have a chance. I have a chance. All right, 2 more. On day 6, I want you to strengthen your connection through eye contact. This is very important, especially if you're talking one-on-one or if you're in a small group. When you're in a large group, yes, you can't look at everybody eye to eye, but it's important that you are actually looking directly into your audience. Why? Because it shows a level of confidence. It shows a level of readiness and preparedness. If you have to continue to refer to your notes, it's as if you don't know your own notes. Okay. So number 6, strengthen the connection through the eye contact. During a conversation or presentation, focus on natural eye contact with your audience for at least 5 seconds or more. Okay. If you got an audience of 10, 15, 20 people, kind of move it around. Don't just stare somebody down. That's uncomfortable. The question you want to ask yourself is, did maintaining eye contact impact the connection with my audience? And I'll tell you, it will. It will. People appreciate being talked to directly, because one of the things that you can tell, at least I can, when people won't give me eye contact, it makes me feel like they're not being truthful. But when they are giving me eye contact, I can tell if a person is being genuine or not. It is very difficult, and I'm not saying that it can't be done, but for a normal human being to look you in the eye and be deceitful it's a really hard thing to do. Okay? Now, don't get me wrong. There are people who can do it and they do it every day. But a regular person who's not a deceiver, who's not a liar, who is not someone who practices deception, for them to look at you directly in the eye and deceive you, it will be telling. It would be an uncomfortable thing for them because they're not used to doing it. And so eye contact shows confidence. It shows some legitimacy because someone can look at you and say, you know what, I feel like this person's being authentic. All right, so the last thing. On day 7, we're going to end with a clear call to action. Conclude a meeting or conversation, motivating and inspiring with the next step. Don't just leave your audience hanging. Okay. If you listen to this podcast, I'm always asking you guys to do certain things. Why? Because I need you to do certain things. I would like for you to do certain things. And I won't know if you're going to do it unless I ask. And hey, you won't know I want you to do it unless I ask. Okay. I'm not going to presuppose that you understand or you've seen my notes or that you can read my mind. So I'm going to ask you to subscribe to the podcast. I'm going to ask you to continue to come back week after week. I'm going to ask you to share and to share alike. Okay. The question you want to ask here is, how did the call to action clarify the direction and inspire confidence within my audience? Mastering leadership communication. It enhances every aspect of your life, from building trust with teams to inspiring action in communities. When you refine your ability to connect with other people through your words, you can amplify your influence. I'm a witness of that. You can build stronger relationships and you can empower others to achieve their potential. This is the benefit of what we're talking about today. If you're able to bring people together simply by using your words, by inspiring people using motivational words and acting and becoming and realizing that you're a leader, people will look to you to lead. People will look to people who have these characteristics. So what I want you to do is to listen to the podcast again, as I always say. I do have a spreadsheet I want to share with you, and I'm going to put it in the show notes. And it is a leadership voice planner. It is a storytelling blueprint, and also the 7-day journal that I talked about with all the questions that, I asked you. I'm going to put it in the journal so you'll have it, so you don't have to remember it all. But go back, listen to it again. couple this with our prior podcast about how can I upgrade my presentation or, my public speaking skills. And I think you're going to be on to something. We'll come back to this because I think you guys like it. And I want to give you what you're asking for. So if this is the type of content you want, I'll certainly give it to you. I really appreciate you guys hanging out with me today, especially if you stay all the way to the end. Thank you so much. I'll be back again tomorrow. So come back and check us out. Thank you and be well.